Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Chiang. I am so excited to introduce to you this week's guest to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. We have Dr. Una, the founder of EntreMD, who has been my business coach through the EntreMD Business School. She is an amazing speaker, podcaster, and author of multiple best-selling books. Dr. Una started her own entrepreneurial journey when she opened her own pediatric private practice and now runs two multi-million-dollar companies. Dr. Una, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I get to be here.
Dr. Una, you talk about achieving financial freedom through entrepreneurship. Who is the kind of person you think should consider entrepreneurship as their path to financial freedom?
So you know me, so you know that I will say like every doctor should consider this path, but I'll explain what I mean by that. Historically, we had a monopoly, if you will, in the physician space, and so we had job security because we were, the only ones who did what we did. And if you started a practice, there was not a lot of players in the private practice space either, right? There was no Amazon, there's no CVS, Walmart, like none of these things existed. And so we really could thrive on the take care of the patients and other people take care of everything else model. Like that, it worked, it worked until it didn't. And so compare that to the time that we're in, you hear doctors talk a lot about loss of autonomy. They talk about burnout. And then there isn't financial security anymore. Like back in the day, like a doctor being let go, that was not a thing that ever happened. Like it just didn't really happen. And so entrepreneurship is kind of our way of taking back control, getting back in the driver's seat, controlling how much we earn, controlling how we use our time. And I don't know that we can do without it. So there's so many ways that will look. For the person who's employed, that will look like being an entrepreneur, which means you still learn the business skills. You know how to negotiate like a boss. You understand how to affect the bottom line on where you work. So you can have these business conversations with CFOs, CMOs, because you understand that. Dr. Chiang, that we've had people who they're entrepreneurs, they negotiate for scribes, they negotiate for 12 weeks off in a year and still make more than they've ever made, right? Some people are like, I would prefer to work fewer, shifts, if you will, and, have my time back. And then they do locums. But this is all from being an entrepreneur, being back in control. And so whether you're employed or whether you're going to decide to start a private practice or be a coach, consultant, speaker, event host, product creator, any of those things, I think every physician should be looking at, thinking about entrepreneurship, embracing it in whichever way they want to, but we can't leave our financial future in somebody else's hands. Like we have to take back control. So my answer is all the physicians.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you say, just to reiterate, is that it doesn't mean that every physician has to actually own their own business, but they're owning their own brand, their own self, and they're being kind of a business within their position. So they can be employed by a hospital or healthcare system, but they're doing the marketing and business to bring themselves, their brand, patients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so for other people, it may look different. They work, with their hospital, all of that stuff. And then they decide they want to have a podcast they monetize, or they want to be a paid speaker or whatever. It can look so many different ways. So we get to choose what we want our path to be inside or outside of employment, but we just need to learn how to build that business system around it so it works.
So I could hear some specialties of physicians saying, well, sure, that works if you have direct patient care, but that doesn't work for me, like maybe a pathologist or anesthesiologist. What would you say to them?
Oh, there are many anesthesiologists who are all kinds of entrepreneurs, right? And so there are people who choose that, real estate is what they want to do. And so they do what they do at their job and they do real estate at the side. There are many anesthesiologists who go really big on the speaking path and they are paid speakers. That's what they do. I don't actually have any friends who are pathologists, right? But it's the same, the philosophy is you have a brand and there are multiple different ways, right? Like, so for some people, it would be a podcast they would monetize. They want to talk about whatever it is. For some people, it would be pathology. For some other people, it may just be the process of becoming a high performer, like how I became a doctor, how you can accomplish whatever dreams you want. And they go that route. Some people patent products. Like there's so many things, and we have so many ideas anyway. It's just understanding like I can pursue these ideas and I can build a business system around them. So it doesn't have to be a business doesn't have to be based on clinical care. It could be inside of medicine, outside of medicine. The opportunities are endless, endless.
But I guess what I'm getting at is how could like an anesthesiologist be an entrepreneur and increase their clinical power or brand?
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, so there are a number of people who are anesthesiologists who have gone the route of having their own anesthesiology group. That has kind of been the way they have worked that, so that they can, what is the word that I'm looking for? So that they can control how much they earn and what their work situations are like and all of that. A number of people have gone that route. There are some other people who they're anesthesiologists, but they're comfortable speaking. Okay, so imagine this way: you're an anesthesiologist, you're comfortable speaking, you're comfortable doing media. There's still very few doctors who do media for any hospital because we don't necessarily just do media that way. But what that does is it gives you bargaining power, right? So it's not directly with clinical care, but because of the impact you're bringing to the hospital, putting the hospital, like positioning the hospital a certain way, then it gives you opportunity to say, and this is how many hours I want to work, or this is the kind of raise I want to have. Is not directly with the patient, but it affects that, right? Because of the impact you have on the hospital. So there's still many ways to do that, even though you're not saying I brought in extra patients or anything like that.
So in the world of collections and RVUs and increasing that, so what I'm hearing is to really kind of show how you're creating value in ways that are outside of those numbers.
Yes, absolutely. And that can be done.
And I know you believe doctors make great entrepreneurs. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 20% of new businesses fail within the first 2 years, 45% within 5 years, and 65% within 10 years. Do you think physician-run businesses have a higher success rate?
Well, I mean, like, think about the odds we've beaten before, right? Like, so the average admission rate to a medical school would be 9%. That's what we were up against. So if we could do well with that, then what could we do with the business statistics? Those are actually better than what we had to deal with. But the thing is this, a lot of the success in business is not really around the statistics of what is happening everywhere. I think the statistics, the story it tells is this is not a joke. If you're going to do it, you're going to need to learn some things. This is not necessarily a walk in the park, so take it seriously, right? But we also have the opportunity to say, okay, the way I am as a physician, when I come out of medical school, residency, all of that stuff, I'm not equipped to run a successful business, right? And so there are other things I need to learn, right? And so if we put ourselves in a position where we can learn business skills, so make that transition from physician to physician entrepreneur, learn about marketing, learn about selling, learn about building a team, learn about, how do I create revenue in my practice, all of those things. How do I navigate challenges, the inevitable challenges of business? We're setting ourselves up to be in a position where we can thrive, right? People tend to run together, right? Like, so if, for instance, I want to learn Spanish, right? I mean, I could go to a class once a week, or I could move to Spain. And if I move to Spain, chances are I'll be able to learn faster, right? And in the same way with business, I'm sure you're in many groups where people talk about private practice as though it's not a thing, it's all dead, nothing is working, like forget it, throw it all away. But there are also other places where people are like, oh, I brought on, like I've been open for a year. This is how much I'm making in revenue. This is the new team members I brought on. It doesn't mean they don't have challenges, but they're working through the challenges. And so you really want to immerse yourself in spaces where people are winning, so you can learn from them. You can navigate the challenges together with them and all of that. But I don't see those numbers as a reason not to engage in entrepreneurship. I see it as an invitation to look at it as serious business and treat it accordingly. That's the way I see it.
Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, always talks about the employee and self-employed versus the business owner and investor. And a lot of people would say that a physician in private practice is really self-employed as opposed to a business owner. Now, I know that you're actually a business owner with IV Pediatrics. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So when the doctor decides to start a practice, you really have the option, like, am I going to build my job? So this is my job. So I come when I want, I work the way I want. So I'm comfortable that way, but this cannot work without me. Or do you want to build a business asset, meaning that it's almost like you're building a mini healthcare system and you're building something that can work whether you're in it or not. I remember reading the E-Myth Physician really early on, probably my first year in private practice. And I made the decision that I wanted to build something that works without me. And you know my story. So I also decided that at 40, I wanted to retire. And so I was like, I need to build something that would work whether I'm there or not. So I started really early on to build with my exit in mind. And so I would test it, so after the first 2 years or so, I think I hired somebody who would work once a week and I'd be gone and, patients would be mad, like, where were you? We only want to see you and stuff like that. So how do we navigate that? Or the team will act one way when I'm there and one way when I'm not. And it's like, okay, how do we navigate that? Because I'm not going to be here. Documenting systems, downloading IP, like all of those things I did, but it was from that mindset, right? And so it's sometimes people say, I just want to sell my practice, I'm done. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. This is a multi-year process. This is not something you do once, but over the years we built it where I just continued working less and less. And by the time I was 40, I was working a day a week. But my identity as a clinician was so strong that I just couldn't bring myself to stop. So I did that for another 2.5 years before I said, okay, like, I have so much going on in my life. I really need to just lean in and do what I feel like I'm called to do in this time. So because of that, for everyone I help with their private practice, whether that is their desire or not, I'm always trying to help them build from the ground up something that can work without them. Because this is the reason why people say you can't sell a private practice, because when the owner goes, it's done. But for me, I technically haven't been there for 5 years. So it's like, it's the same thing whether I'm there or not. So I really invite every physician to think about that. Don't build a job, build a business asset. And that is something that can work without you. It can still work without you.
And so how much are you still involved with IV Pediatrics?
So I meet with my practice administrator once a week for an hour. And we just go through, vision, where we are, any adjustments we need to make, any questions I need to answer for her and stuff like that. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So it's really a business where you're still owning the business and it's making revenue for you and still serving a mission.
Still serving mission, which is amazing 14 years later.
Now, let's turn it around to coaching. How does a coach build a practice that could exist without them?
Yeah. So, well, the way that so there are a number of systems that need to be in place. And let's try and break it down where you have your marketing, for instance, right? Like, so all the things you do to attract people into your world and all of that. You have your selling as far as making offers, those kind of things, conversion events. And then you have the actual service delivery. Okay, so there's finance and all of that, but we don't have to do that. So let's think about these 3 areas. And usually the owner would be very heavily vested in all 3 of them. And so before we get into building a business that will work without the person, the first stage is to get the business profitable, right? Like, get the business profitable, get a team on board. That would be the first quote unquote hurdle to cross. But if someone wants to build something that work without them, the documentation of everything that is being done is like very critical, right? So that would be one thing that just needs to happen. Like, for instance, your coaching calls, how do you run that? How do you start it? How do you end it? That needs to be there. When you run events, how do you run that? All these things need to be documented. The second thing is, very early on, you want to put your team in front of your brand so people understand that this is a company, this is not you, right? So you would see when I do workshops, If it's a 5-day workshop, one of the days or 2 other days, Makita will run those. I'm not even there at all. That's done intentionally. So people understand this is an organization. This is not just Dr. Una. We would have sessions in the EntreMD Business School that Makita would run, or we would split it or things like that. We've also had Jessica do, like other team members do that as well. Same thing with, the marketing. Sometimes when I do events where I'm out there, I could do split event, like it's a split events where we're doing the back and forth, almost like a panel style. Is just getting people used to the fact that this is not always going to be me. And then as you go through that journey, you just inject more and more of your team. Some people do try to do it too early, because, for instance, the stage that my business is in, I'm not looking to replace everything and walk away or anything like that, because I'm still in what I consider the developmental phase. There's still a lot of visionary work that's being done and all of that. But even though I'm not there, I've already started integrating all those elements. So all the documentation is happening and bringing the team on board is happening. So those two things are pretty critical. Yeah.
Yeah, I just asked because actually Katrina Ubell has, I guess, announced that she's closing her coaching business.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it seems kind of crazy. But and even Brooke Castillo in the Life Coach School, she is closing the Self-Coaching Scholars.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So many reasons why many things happen, but, yeah. Yeah.
Well, this has been, I think, a great conversation. Is there any last take-home point you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah. So there are many things we can talk about that will be very inspiring and that make sense and all of those things. But, for me in my journey as an entrepreneur, one of the things I know that's made the biggest difference is just that ability to listen to something and say, okay, I'm going to make this change. It can be one change. It could be 2 changes. So whatever that is for you after listening to this episode, it might be you're like, okay, entrepreneurship, haven't really thought about it. Maybe I want to lean into that. I want to learn a little more. Or maybe you have a private practice, but your private practice is a job and you want to start making that transition to build it as an asset. Whatever that is, I just want to invite you to take action. That really is where the rubber meets the road. That really is where all the transformation happens. So take one step, any step, go take that. And you can come let Dr. Chiang know, like, oh my goodness, I listened to your podcast episode. This is what I did. And this is the change it created for me. That's really how the magic of radical transformation happens.
Yeah, and anyone who has any interest in being an entrepreneur or entrepreneur, I highly suggest listening to the EntreMD podcast. It is pure gold.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on. And I've always enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everything that you do for physicians everywhere, because all hands are needed on deck. So thank you for what you do.
And thank you to our listeners for being here, listening to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. It really helps to get the word out. I'll be back next week with another episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.